New Hope is a pretty vibey, witchy place, and back then, you really didn't know kind of what was going to happen. There was something in the air. I don't even know how to explain it. It's a witchy place.
In Pennsylvania, a terrible accident led to a mystery. A young man was pulled from the wreckage, but when he arrived at the hospital, his identity was a mystery. He became a John Doe, but his real name was Claude Coleman Jr. Was this mystery just a serious case of deja vu? Perhaps someone listening today will be able to help. Join us for another episode of Weencast as we get to the bottom of this unsolved mystery.
Weencast, a Ween podcast with Shane and Rory. Hey, what's up? This is Shane.
And this is Rory.
And this is Weencast. And we welcome you to a new episode. What is up, everybody?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode. It's summertime. Summertime.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel too warm right now, but it's feeling good to be in summer anyway.
Yeah, it's been a rainy, cold, chilly couple days, but I digress.
Well, we are back with something we've been meaning to do for a little while, and we just got to get it out there. So the last couple of shows that we talked about were in 2002, and we could not get away from 2002 without talking about Claude's accident and the Josh Freese era. But we wanted to go back and sort of discuss everything for the whole timeline around Claude's accident and Josh Freese filling in for him for what seemed to be a lot longer than what it really was, because it winds up being only 6 total shows.
Hey, this is Weencast. Hey there, sprinkle genies. You don't know that it's time for the stunningly staggering and stupendous Weencast summer contest? Seriously, don't you think it's time you submitted an entry? About the best live Ween show that you've been to? And why? Who? Hello, Molly. You're probably saying to yourself, why the hell would I want to submit an entry? Oh, well, listen, folks. The answer is very simple. The winner gets a beautiful woodcraft prize from West Brandywine Woodworks. Oh, I'm getting moist. Submit an entry on Spotify or email us at weencastpodcast@gmail.com or just hit us up on the socials. This is going to be the most swaggeringly ostentatious contest yet, so don't miss out. Entries are due by Labor Day. Happy summer, everyone!
Is your cutting board dried out, ugly, and lacking luster? Do your tables have too many water rings to count and need a fix? Are your kitchen utensils old and damaged? Maybe you just want to add a little bit of natural wood beauty to your home. Whatever it is, you can count on West Brandywine Woodworks to provide for you. We make high-quality, custom hardwood items for your home. From cutting boards to shelving, West Brandywine Woodworks has you covered. Find us on Facebook and Instagram. Mention Weencast when you order for 21% off. So give us a like and a follow, and don't forget to mention Weencast for 21% off your order. West Brandywine Woodworks. Custom simplicity for your home.
There's just so many things that go back to this time period of the end of 2002, the beginning of 2003, that are just so like monumental in the band's history. There's a lot of first time for this, or the last time this ever happened. Just a lot of different things, and a lot of things that go back when you start talking about the different eras in the band that would come after this and how they sort of sprung out and grew out of this time period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude. No, that's well put. That's well put. So Claude's accident is August 7th of 2002. And at that point, Ween hadn't been playing for a few months. They played at Bonnaroo in June, and they had a couple of shows in June, and they had a few shows in May of that year, and then a little tour in April. So Ween had been kind of idle, but they were starting to work on Quebec, as I recall.
Yeah, a lot of the shows for that 2000, the beginning of 2002, and those few shows that they did throughout the summer, you're starting to see some of those Quebec songs for the first time.
Yeah, totally.
We talked about the beginning of 2002, the Conduit and the Sterling Hotel, and then there really isn't that many shows after that. They play through April, few shows in May, and a few shows in June. And then they were obviously taking some time off because Claude was actually doing some shows with Amandla. And that's what he was in the middle of when he got into his accident.
He was out hanging flyers for his upcoming Amandla tour. So it says the last memory he has is he's eating a slice of pizza and he's worried about getting a ticket. And anyway, he's getting out to his car and he actually is driving a rental. Claude at that time was driving a Saab 9000, and the Saab didn't have a fifth gear. So he had to get a rental to get around. I guess just to hang the flyers? That's kind of crazy if you think about it. I have to get a rental vehicle so I can get around to hang up the flyers to get ready for my upcoming tour because my car can't go on a highway.
Well, I mean, I know that this is off topic already, but my brother had a couple of different Saabs, and I know they were always a bitch to get worked on.
Yeah.
So maybe his Saab was just in the shop for like an extended period of time. So he was like, fuck it, I'll just get a rental until my Saab is done. So could have just been him with a rental for, a few weeks or a couple of months. But isn't that crazy in and of itself that like he wasn't in his actual car?
Yeah, that becomes important to the story,
Yeah.
as we shall see.
Yeah.
So anyway, he's driving on I-78 in New Jersey, which also extends into Pennsylvania, heading through like Allentown and whatnot. But this is the New Jersey side of that. And anyway,
Right.
the story goes, and this is from Claude's lips, but he doesn't remember all of this. So this was told to him, I think, by the authorities. But he veered to the left to avoid a car that had just slammed on the brakes in front of him. And then there was a tractor trailer right behind him. It did the same thing as him, but it didn't have space and it was too big. So it rammed him, which shoved him into oncoming traffic. And then he was T-boned. Interestingly, just a few years later, the truck driver who rammed Claude from behind and sent him into oncoming traffic actually was involved in a fatal accident and ended up getting charged with careless driving and equipment violations. So sometimes karma comes into play, and sometimes what goes around comes around. Fate. Can't escape your fate. Can't escape your destiny.
I mean, just listening to you describe the accident, I get like cringy. I mean, it's insane the fact that he survives such an accident like that.
And that's a highway.
Yeah, man, just you describing it, it's like, oh my God. Like, I can't even imagine such a terrible accident. And the fact that he lives is a miracle.
Yeah, man, totally. But yeah, dude, it is. You're right. It is crazy. This is serious shit we're talking about.
Oh my God.
The car was all mangled up. They actually had to pull the top off. And he certainly was devastatingly injured. Just to kind of run down his injuries, he suffered multiple fractures of the pelvis, severe brain trauma, blood clotting in the brain, resulting in paralysis on the left side, fractured jaw, damage to his vision that caused vertigo and dizziness, muscle damage to his legs and back. And that's Claude as quoted in Denver Post, FYI.
Wow.
So yeah, dude, I mean, that's pretty intense when you think about oncoming traffic on a highway. He's like obviously seriously lucky to have survived. And I had mentioned the rental, and that's actually important because Claude ends up being a John Doe at the hospital for 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
His ID gets misplaced, filed away at the hospital. His identifying materials, for some reason, get filed away and separated from him. So they don't know who he is for 2 days.
Right.
And it's crazy because his dad actually drove through the accident scene. But because he was driving a rental, the dad didn't even like think anything of like, oh, it could be my son, you know? So it's crazy. Like, and then he ended up being unknown for 2 days in the hospital.
And the fact that the information for the accident would have had his rental car as like the details. So probably no one knows, or maybe one other person knew, oh, Claude had that rental car or
Oh,
whatever,
totally.
you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They couldn't just run a license plate and then, and the way he explained it, and this is from just a heads up to Drummer's Resource podcast. Claude recounts it like there's no real explanation for why he gets put into the hospital as a John Doe. Like why was this like he had his ID and stuff like shouldn't have it was a mistake. In other words, like he shouldn't have been filed as a John Doe. They had his information.
Yeah, like somebody just didn't put the pieces together of like, oh, make sure that the man who was in the accident has his stuff here. Like, someone probably just took that to somewhere else, the local police station or something, whereas he was sent to the hospital, you know?
Yeah, and so meanwhile, his wife assembles everyone apparently. His dad, I'm not clear on exactly what they said, but he was some kind of director with the police, so he was having like state people looking for him. So everyone was looking for Claude.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually chatted with Tomato, a Sound of Urchin, because he actually played at the Whiskey Bar, which is one of the shows that are about to come up, and then also at the Bowery Ballroom benefit shows. He opens for Ween for those as well.
Yeah, man.
So we talked to him to get his input on all of this stuff, and he said that he was actually up in Massachusetts, Berkfest, which is
Mm-hmm.
just this like hippie festival.
Yep.
And actually, interestingly enough, Glenn was up there with him as well because they were playing at a jam festival. Tomato thought it'd be cool to bring in a piano, even though there's not usually a piano for Sound of Urchin. So Glenn was actually up there with Tomato when they found out about Claude's disappearance. And so they were just like, oh shit, man, like not again. Like that's what he expressed. Like, a few years before that, do you remember exactly when it was? A guy named Dave Anderson went missing in New Hope and ended up finding him in the canal, dead.
Right. Right.
And that was like kind of a flashback. Dave Anderson, which is a New Hope local who lived in a farmhouse with everybody, and he went missing, and he was found in the river,
Oh,
like
man.
a bunch of days later. But so we had flashbacks to that from a few summers before. Like, oh my God, Claude's missing.
But it was just kind of like crazy, crazy shit. And the way Tomato recounts it is that, back then, New Hope was kind of like this witchy place, you know?
Yeah.
And so all these other people, they're just kind of like, oh shit, Claude's missing. Like, where is he, right? Like, he's a John Doe. So no one knew what was going on.
Right.
And with this other stuff going on, like in New Hope, and just everyone sort of, there's this eerie sense of like, not again,
Mm-hmm.
is sort of how he expressed it.
Yeah, he definitely confirms that that was sort of the first thing that they had heard, is that Claude was missing.
Yeah. And so that's kind of crazy. After 2 days, and I guess this was kind of running right up to when they found him, Mickey said he expected they to find a body.
Crazy, man.
And then newspapers are still a thing back then that people actually read. And the hospital ran a John Doe ad in the paper, and Claude's mom read it, and then they ran to the hospital in Newark, and then he was no longer a John Doe.
Yeah. It's just a crazy happenstance. And especially back then, sort of like, before the smartphone era, Tomato also talks about that and being, away and being at a festival, and they were kind of like, okay, spotty service at their hippie festival and getting all the information and whatnot. Different time.
Yeah, dude. It's like it's not like everyone just suddenly heard it on their Facebook feed, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he's at the hospital for a while. Dude, he had a hardcore road road of recovery.
Yeah, man.
Apparently he had to relearn parts of speech and memory and ways to communicate and also the walking. He couldn't walk for 2 months.
Crazy, man.
Yeah, dude. He actually comes to the concerts for Claude, which we're gonna get to a little bit later. They bring him up in a wheelchair. Fred was telling us that story.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we can talk about the kind of his road to recovery. His sister gives him a Kabat-Zinn, Dr. John Kabat-Zinn book. That's a guy who advocates like meditation and mindfulness. And we talk about this in our episode where we review Amandla.
Mm-hmm.
But Claude saw this as like it became a huge part of his recovery. And so, do you want me to read some of this quote from Claude?
Yeah,
This is from,
please.
this is from Glide, by the way. But Claude says that Kabat-Zinn teaches us lessons on acceptance as well as courage with grace. We need to accept all the crap along with the positive. It's all the essence of the living experience that makes being alive so precious. In studying his teachings, my already pretty high threshold of pain and discomfort has become limitless. The struggles, tribulations, and trials of being alive are exactly the same as life's joys, gifts, accomplishments, and with this understanding comes a reduction of the soaring stress in the body that the pain causes, which is great and without rest. I haven't had a day without pain in 5 years. Perhaps for the rest of life, I'll be dealing with it. But in accepting and processing the pain, I've still found tremendous enjoyment in everything I do. So that was around 2007, because it had been 5 years after.
Wow, man. I mean, it's beautiful. It really is. And the fact that, like, someone can take an experience like that, and there again, to me, I listen to that quote, and it's kind of like, well, lucky to be alive and still on the earth. A lot of people would just get, sore about it. Oh, woe is me. This happened to me and whatnot. But Claude uses it, you know? Claude uses it to come back.
Totally.
And, just an amazing man. He really is.
Yeah, dude, it's like trying to turn these negatives into positives
Yeah.
and using it as a way to motivate yourself, understanding that it's part of the whole package, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Went to a therapist just about daily. I forget what the article said, but it must have been like 6 hours a day or something, like 5 days a week. And then 3 of those days, he also went to the gym for several hours after that. So he was like an intense recovery. And he plays a couple shows with Ween or as Ween in December of 2002 and then like early 2003, which is kind of miraculous because the accident's in August.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable to think that later that same year, even though it was the end of the year, he would actually be playing music again.
That's basically like 4 months later, he's actually starting to play.
Yeah.
And he talks about how his perception and the paralysis actually affects his drumming in that he doesn't have the placement of his hand properly, and he would be hitting his knuckles a lot on the drum and actually bleeding a lot, and obviously cuts and stuff. And he said it took him 7 months to get back to where he didn't have to think about all of that. And I imagine he probably still hit his knuckles some of the time, but he says it took about 7 months before it was like kind of like he was getting back to normal as far as the drumming
Wow.
goes. And that kind of takes us to the actual when Ween starts to tour again. So more or less, there's like a 7 month period where Ween does not quite a dozen. I mean, they scatter about 10 shows or so
Right.
over the 7 month period. So they're not completely dormant. And a lot of those are with Josh Freese, which we'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, dude, that's kind of the story of Claude's accident, which sets all of this other shit into motion, right?
Right.
And so I don't know if you want to kind of jump in and talk a little bit about the whiskey bar.
Yeah. So August 22nd is the next quote unquote Ween show in 2002. Now, we're not 100% clear on this, but when talking to Tomato, he kind of explained that the whiskey bar in Hoboken, New Jersey was already booked for Amandla to play, which would make sense because, you know, like we said, the beginning of August is Claude's accident, so you would think he's already got some dates lined up for the Amandla shows.
Yeah, totally.
So rather than just canceling it, they get together between Mickey and Aaron, Tomato, Dave, and they kind of put on what they called Claude Aid. So this is sort of like the first night of the whole experience. This is an absolutely amazing night in terms of not just the band's history, but the history of the whole Ween family tree.
Yeah, dude.
It's instant death, followed by Ween, and then Sound of Urchin. Okay? When I talk about firsts and lasts, this night is basically loaded with them. I mean, the fact that Ween, even though, I mean, obviously they're considered to be the headliner, you know, whatever, they play second and not the last act of the night. And this is the last time up until, you know, the current day that it's Mickey and Aaron with just the DAT machine.
Yeah, dude.
So it's just the two guys with no other band. Now they do play LMLYP is the last song, and they have Tomato from Sound of Urchin play drums with them. Mm-hmm. And it's a fucking sick ass LMLYP. But it's the last time that the two guys would play with the DAT machine. This was it.
Yeah, dude. No, it's really cool. It's the last time they would do that, and it's interesting when you think about from August 7th to the 22nd, right? We're talking about just over 2 weeks. And so it was
Right.
like, oh, the venue's already booked for Amandla. And I love that there's obviously the immediate thought, let's try to raise some money for Claude.
Yeah.
And the whiskey bar is just a little place in Hoboken, which totally makes sense for like an Amandla show, I think. It's got this, so there's got the three bands in the lineup, and they all play really kind of very short sets. And you can actually listen to this on archive.org. It takes a little bit of trickery finding it. The all combined, it can't be more than like an hour and 45 minutes or something. And that's for like all three bands.
Yeah, each band does a very short set, but between all three of them together, it's kind of like one full night.
Yeah, totally. No, it's great. I mean, I wish I had gone. Like,
oh, forget it.
It's definitely something I don't even remember if I ever even heard about it. I don't know how much. That's not any information we were able to find, like as far as like how much it was they were to market it. Obviously, it was just thrown together.
Right. And it's just kind of amazing to think that, okay, well, you know, obviously Claude's out. Like, what do we do? And Ween sort of went back on their, you know, history. Well, this is what we did before we had a drummer.
I know, like you can't go on without a drummer.
Yeah, they coughed up the tapes. You know, all right, well, let's just break out the tape.
Yeah. At one point in the evening, Aaron says, "Oh, well, this tape's from 1991, so that's all we got." Yeah, you know, it's amazing because they did a few shows. They did a whole tour without Glenn.
Right.
Right? Can you do too many without a drummer, right? And so it's kind of like we got to bring out the DAT because that's our drum backing, you know?
Yeah.
Instant Death opens, which is great.
Yeah.
They end with the Enabler, which is a good highlight. go ahead and read the Ween set list,
Yeah.
and we can talk a little bit about it. So it's all old school shit. So you've got You Fucked Up, Common Bitch, Cover It With Gas and Set It on Fire, Seconds, I Can't Put My Finger on It, Ode to Renee, Papa's It, LMLYP. So they have 8 songs. Instant Death has 6, Ween does 8. And they're all relatively short except LMLYP.
It's kind of crazy because there's some banter, going back and forth between Aaron and Mickey. So Aaron says at the beginning,
well, we are Ween's son's drummer tonight because Mr. Claude Coleman is a little under the weather, so let's give our prayers to him tonight.
Claude. But what's kind of funny also is Mickey says, I think maybe they play You Fucked Up and then, or maybe it's right before they start also. Mickey says,
we're bringing it up here, so if there's anything you want to hear, just tell us what it is.
And it's like, how can you take requests with the DAT tape? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, that's the opposite of winging it. You know what I mean? Like, what is, like, why would he say that? And then I think they play a couple of songs and he says something to the effect of, oh yeah, by the way, your requests have to be like 10 plus years old at this point. It's all old shit on the tape. It's like, well, then why were you saying people should make requests at all? Like, what the fuck are they talking about?
And they're asking people what they want to hear. It'd be interesting to know if they were actually taking requests or just saying that to say it.
I mean, I guess if there is something that he could play with just the guitar and just stop the tape, so there's just no, backing behind it, and it's just him on guitar, Aaron on guitar, or Mickey on guitar and Aaron on vocals, you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, just kind of those funny little quotes throughout the night.
Totally. There's not too many like musical highlights for this to talk about. Ode to Renee is pretty rare. And at this point, I don't think they'd played it since like '96, so it had been a few years. And Seconds features some great Giner falsetto. LMLYP is definitely the highlight of the Ween set with Tomato on the drums.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Tomato comes on and plays drums, and that's a pretty sick jam.
Yeah, dude. No, they jam that out really. They have like an extended vocal jam with the lyrics from Alphabet Street, the Prince lyrics that they do.
Mm-hmm.
Diener has this great solo near the end. And they wrap it up by saying, wishing our brother Claude Coleman a very happy and speedy recovery. We all love him very much. It's very endearing how they like mentioned Claude and him not being well, but not being like overly like detailed and like oversharing. It was interesting, and you could tell you probably don't want to say too much. It's not their business to, but also I bet it's hard. It'd be hard to talk about it, I'm sure.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
At this point, he's in the hospital. It's day by day. That's pretty early on in the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
Sound of Urchin wraps up the night. And there's some sweet. So my favorite thing on this Sound of Urchin set is Tomato opens by singing Coldplay a cappella. They're all yellow. The wall skies. Won't they shine for you? I don't know if I have the words right or not.
And I think when we talked to him, you said something about, oh, yeah, you started off with Coldplay. And he just said, of course I did.
He was not ashamed. Tomato was pretty loud and proud. And this is like a pretty hardcore metal. It was a metal night in general. Like, pretty hardcore metal night. But Sound of Urchin was on fire. He's talking about Reverend Be Ill. He's the lover of the band, he says. He says he's the fucking lover of the band. He makes love with everyone on the road. He made love to everyone at the whiskey bar. And then it's funny because an interesting little slice of Ween history, and this kind of becomes important actually for some other things we're talking about, is there was a event they ended up calling Retardo Palooza that they put on at like a strip club.
Yeah, peep show.
Peep show.
Theater.
In September with, is it Moist Boys are with them and Instant Death? Yeah.
So he talks about that during this night. So that would sort of, and we'll get back to it in our sort of like wrap up and everything, but that sort of leads on to another era of the Ween spinoffs and another section of the Ween history.
Totally. Retardopalooza couldn't have been planned until just then, because if Claude's getting ready for Amandla, if Ween's doing Quebec and gearing up for a tour coming up in the fall, then they're not doing Moist Boys. They're not doing like, Dave's not doing Instant Death.
Right.
So this is clearly in response to Claude's accident.
Right.
That they're suddenly just like, oh, let's get this together. Let's do this.
Right.
Let's put on some shows.
Yeah, man.
Right? And that's coming in September.
It's insane.
Green Gold is a good highlight from the Sound of Urchin, which is one of their old jams from their EP.
Oh my God, rock only rock. Oh my God, sing rock only rock. Oh my God, rock only rock. Oh my God, rock only rock.
Yeah, this is still in, well, I mean, this is in the early days of, well, it's in the early days of Urchin, where they're slaying it, man. They start off with a real metal couple of tunes and, slow it down a little bit into some of their classics like Zen Magic Marker and Green Gold. But man, they're on fire.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome. And Tomato a few times is like exhorting the crowd. He's like, we're going to play metal, fuckers. And shit like that. He's just ridiculous. It's funny. One of the funny things, you mentioned how the order that they played, Ween played in the middle, and Fred said one of his memories is that everyone was pissed off because people were coming in like toward the end, like expecting like Ween to be the last one to play, but they played in the middle.
That's why you got to get there for the beginning of the show. No matter who's on, no matter who you're going to see, you got to get there for the opening act, because you never know what's going to happen.
And why wouldn't you want to see Instant Death and Sound of Urchin anyway?
Well, there's probably a lot of people that didn't realize that it's going to be people from, the other Ween bands that are going to open the night, or, whatever.
Yeah, people don't necessarily, they just get the ticket because they see Ween on it.
Right.
Well, it's funny because that's something that, apparently Mickey actually has a penchant of with like Moist Boys and whatnot, to like be like, oh, let's go. We don't want to go last because we want to actually get done and be able to hang out and like party.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that was probably part of it as well for that evening. But yeah, dude, I mean, people coming in late, you miss the Ween, and it's like to miss Ween with the DAT, and then Sound of Urchin's like, and then you're there for Sound of Urchin, and they just like tore you a new one, but you were already sad.
But you're already sad.
I'm kind of like jealous of anyone who was at the whiskey bar show.
Yeah.
Because that sounds like a lot of
Yeah.
fun, and I actually have the audio for that. So it's great.
Yeah, a real like monumental night in the history of, again, not just of Ween, but of the whole, Ween tree, the whole Ween family, was there to represent Claude that night, especially.
It exemplifies how everyone has like a family mentality and everyone circles the wagons, right? Like Claude gets hurt
Mm-hmm.
and then everyone's springing out of the woodwork, try to support him and like bring the community together.
Right.
One of the things that we think is really interesting about this whole situation is the silver lining is how this helped bring out the community more so.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different things that are able to happen within the whole Ween community that may not have kind of churned out like at that time if this hadn't happened.
Right.
Not obviously, I'd rather that the accident never happened, but it's kind of like interesting that these other things never would have happened either,
Yep.
you know? So it's kind of like
Yep.
it's fate. I mentioned fate earlier. I'm in a very like Roadhouse mood, you know, like a rule your fate, you know?
Wow.
I know. And I'm watching The Witcher right now, and so that's all about destiny and boobs. It's kind of like Netflix's answer to Game of Thrones, I think.
I was just gonna say, sounds like Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it's not quite as racy though. Anyway, now I digress.
So the next couple of events, they have to fill in with they have to get a fill-in drummer. So who gets picked to fill in for Claude? None other than Josh Freese. Now, at the time, I have to admit, I didn't really know anything about him. I think maybe I had sort of like heard the name once or twice. And we talked about him a little bit when we covered the John and Peter show that we were at. But Josh Freese is basically one of the best drummers for hire of all time.
Yeah, dude. He's illustrious.
At this point that we're talking about in 2002, we're pretty sure there was a big connection through the Queens of the Stone Age because he played with them and so did Mickey. And you know what? So did Dave Grohl. And hey, cut to now. Who gets tapped to join Foo Fighters after Taylor Hawkins' death? Josh Freese. So here we are. Josh Freese was a part of Ween history for this little period of time.
It's interesting how Ween fits into that puzzle, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's just like, okay, what do those things have to do with each other between Dave Grohl, Mickey, and Josh Freese, Queens of the Stone Age? You know what I mean? So it's just a funny little thing.
Yeah, totally.
That all sort of like stems from there. But, Josh Freese would go on to do some amazing work with Guns N' Roses, Devo. As a matter of fact, I kind of wonder how they're going to do that. Like if he'll still be able to drum for Devo now that he's joined up with Foo Fighters. Because I think even still to this day, when Devo goes on tour, it's Josh Freese as drummer.
Interesting.
Yeah, but a lot of other great acts too, like Sting. So just a really amazing career. And he was the one that filled in for Claude and does some just amazing work filling in for Claude and learning a shitload of songs.
We talk about this last episode's the John and Peter show B for October 6th, which are like the warm-up shows for the concerts for Claude, which is kind of like the big whole reason why it's like, okay, we're going to play Ween and we need a drummer. And they bring him in basically just like a couple days before that. Between the two Bowery Ballroom shows, there's about 50 songs that he has to like pick up and learn in a couple days. And an interesting fact is that Claude didn't write anything down. So he just had to listen to tapes.
Wow. Unbelievable, man. Unbelievable.
And, you know, if you're, I guess, really skilled and you have a good ear, like, I guess it's not as challenging as it sounds, but it's badass in my mind.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive to me.
Yeah, you know, you put on the headphones and you start playing along and you're like listening to what he's doing and you're playing along. So, you know, he's a competent drummer and by all, not trying to like, overly inflate his like being, but like, everyone says great things about him. I know Claude's said he's like Superman. Tomato is like, he's the guy that could learn a song, master it, go in the studio and kill it. I thought he did a great job at John and Peters, and those are the first two shows, and those would be the ones where if he was going to be the rustiest or rockiest, those would be the shows. But I really feel like there wasn't much of a drop off, you know.
Oh, definitely not.
He was able to come in and fill in, pretty legit, just about right away.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing lesser about those shows at all. You know, someone could listen to any one of those nights where Josh Freese is filling in for Claude, and not to say you wouldn't miss Claude or anything like that, but you wouldn't think it was any lesser of a band. Not one bit. Not one bit. So do you want to kind of run down the list of all of the shows with him playing?
Well, yeah, dude. We mentioned the two John and Peters, and those are October 6th. And then they do the two concerts for Claude, October 7th and 8th at the Bowery Ballroom in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And then they do a pair of shows down in the Carolinas, Halloween and November 1st. The first one's in the Millennium Center in Winston-Salem, and November 1st is the House of Blues at Myrtle Beach. And you can listen to the John and Peters shows. We found those on archive.org. Unfortunately, the recordings, especially of show A, the recording is pretty poor. And one of the legends of the Bowery Ballroom shows, the concerts for Claude, which is kind of where we're heading next in this conversation anyway, so I'm not spoiling anything too soon, that there isn't, at least as far as anyone that we've talked to is aware, there's not any audio. You can't listen to those shows. But we were able to get a hold of the November 1st show from Fred and the House of Blues at Myrtle Beach, and that's a really nice recording. So that's Fred's tape. And he actually said Fred was at all these shows. And he actually said in his opinion, November 1st was the best of the group, which is like the last one to have them. It's the House of Blues on the beach. So like kind of feels right to have that be the best Josh Freese experience,
Yeah. Wow, man.
So that's a general rundown of the Josh Freese situation. It's only these 6 shows.
It's just crazy to think.
So I feel blessed that I got to at least one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I could sit here and beat myself up that, I wasn't at either the Whiskey Bar or the Bowery, one of the Bowery Ballroom nights, but I'm just so grateful that we were able to get to one of the shows with Josh Freese. I don't think we, obviously at the time we didn't really think that much of it. I wasn't even sure who he was. Oh, okay, fill-in drummer. That's all I knew. You know what I mean? But
I know, I know I was bummed. I guess I felt like I didn't know that much about what was going on, just feeling like, oh, bummed, oh, there's not Claude there. Like it's somehow lesser. Right. Whereas now I look back and I just realize that was like a part of history that we got to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And it was good, and it still was good. Like it still was, there was nothing bad about the shows.
We were on the correct side of Ween history on that one.
Yeah, totally. That's one way to think about it. We wanted to take some time and talk about the Bowery Ballroom shows. So how about we talk about that, too?
Yeah, man. It's we could sit here and say over and over and over, well, there's no recordings of them, but basically the idea of both of the nights was sort of a extended plan, a more thought out and planned out event between the two nights, similar to what they did in Hoboken.
Yes.
In other words, let's get everyone together. Let's do a full-blown Ween show with Josh Freese on the drums, but we'll have everybody come and play between Instant Death, Sound of Urchin, Chris Hartford. So everyone sort of gets in on one of those 2 nights.
I think there was a sense that the Hoboken show went so well and it was such a good vibe and helping Claude out, but getting all the bands together. They had Ween shows already booked. And then it was, dude, let's do this. Let's make this happen, you know?
Yeah, and it's sort of like the closest thing to what I would consider to be like a Ween festival. I know back in those days, we always would sort of like, oh, wouldn't it be awesome if there was a whole weekend of, Ween plus Urchin plus, and you just keep naming all the different Moist Boys. This was, I am pains to say, is there another event or another couple of nights that are as close to that as these two? If there was, I don't know what they would be.
Well, the shirt lists all the bands involved, and you got Ween, Sound of Urchin, Chocolate Genius, Instant Death, Chris Hartford and the Band of Changes, and Sharif and Burgundy. Yeah, dude, I don't know. Is there another time when you have all of these in one place like this?
I don't think so. I really don't.
Not as like a whole night, 2 nights of music. Yeah, had they gotten together to play music together? Of course they have. For like a set at John and Peters or something. To have it, like you said, be like a festival. Like this was it, man.
And let's not forget that the night that we saw John and Peters was a Sunday. So these are the following 2 nights.
Yeah.
Monday and Tuesday.
Pull off 2 sets a Sunday and then go right into 2 nights, Monday, Tuesday. It's like, Josh Freese,
nuts.
You ready for this, motherfucker? And we actually have an interesting anecdote to share that we received from our friends Greg and Marcus, who I met on Facebook. And Greg is a big music guy and a big Ween fan. And him and Marcus were actually at the Bowery Ballroom shows. But Greg's a guy who's working at CMJ magazine back in the day, which was what's it stand for?
It stands for College Media Journal.
And I knew they did like music reporting and other reporting like that. Anyway, he actually drove Aaron to the shows. He thinks it's 20 years. He definitely drove him one night. He thinks he remembers it was both, but anyway, it definitely was one night. So Greg had a friend named Kenny. I was name dropping people I don't even like really know. Kenny, how you doing, Kenny? Anyway, Kenny was a bartender at the 11th Street Bar in New York, which is like a mile north of the Bowery Ballroom, more or less. And I don't know, Greg describes him as one of those classic New York City bartenders who knows everyone. And so Kenny knew Aaron. And Aaron's on the phone with Kenny. And next thing you know, he's just like, hey, Aaron needs a ride. So Greg was like, I'll give you a ride.
And, it's a shame because we were at the same bar that night. And, if I would have known.
So that's pretty cool. And, it's pretty awesome because he actually he's like, yeah, we like kind of talked to Aaron, which is really neat. Cause I feel like if I was doing that, I would have just sat there like an idiot and not said a word the whole time. And so he was like, yeah, we actually asked him about Josh Freese. And it's notable because Aaron was very just praising him. He's like, he was super confident. Aaron was like, he was literally the only guy who could handle the gigs.
Yeah, I mean, you get the sense from talking to Greg that Aaron sort of portrayed without Josh Freese, we wouldn't be able to pull this off.
Yeah. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, man.
That's heady praise.
Yeah, totally.
That's pretty cool. And right before the shows, it's like he's like, these are like fans, they're like driving you to the show, and you're just like, oh man, Josh Freese is awesome. That's really cool going into it because obviously there was a lot of concern about Claude, and then, what's the show going to be like without Claude? Like everyone was there, like obviously hoping and thinking it'll be good, but also wondering what's Ween gonna do, and this is just a new drummer. Having low expectations, right? It's kind of like we're here to support, to see Ween and enjoy ourselves, but also to support Claude, and we'll take what we can get. But it ended up just being like amazing because Josh Freese is amazing. And in that car, that was also where I guess Aaron mentioned the Queens of the Stone Age as the connection.
Yeah, man.
So that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool little tidbit. The first night, which is October 7th, the Monday, the lineup, and this is I'm going to say not 100% confirmed, but I think we have this correct. These aren't really, these lineups aren't really listed on like Brown Base or anywhere, and the T-shirt doesn't list them in the correct order or anything. So this is based on people who were there, kind of giving us the heads up. It starts, so it goes Instant Death, Urchin, and then Ween. It's actually interesting that the Hoboken show was Instant Death, Ween, Urchin,
Right.
but this one reverts it for like a real Ween show. It reverts it. That's kind of funny. And then the second night, apparently Harford, Chocolate Genius, and Ween. The Sharif and Burgundy, to be honest, I'm not sure who that is.
I think there's some other people from a mandala that might be
Oh, is that
Sharif. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that either.
okay? Okay, that makes sense. That it would be like the rest of Amandla is. Yeah, that's good. Good heads up.
Right.
But I'm not sure where they fit into the lineup.
Right. Right.
But they probably were second. They probably were the second night if Tomato played the first night and he doesn't remember them being part of the first night.
And just an interesting little tidbit about like the whole history. And, you know, my impression was always that like all of those bands played both nights, but that's not the case. It was only Ween that played both of those nights, and the other ones was either one night or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting little tidbit,
Yeah, totally.
you know?
Yeah. So a little bit of interesting stuff to share. I guess we can start with night one and then we can get to night two. But Instant Death is dressed up like Clockwork Orange with bowler hats. And like we said, we haven't listened to the show, but we have the Ween set list. There's not a lot to say about it. Not too many uncommons. I think that's a theme with Josh Freese is that there's not too many rares, but they do still keep some rares in the mix. Do we want to read the set list?
Yeah, let's just read them. Yeah. All right. So for night one is Take Me Away, Captain Fantasy, Don't Get Too Close to My Fantasy, Waving My Dick in the Wind, Mr. Richard Smoker, Bananas and Blow, Roses Are Free, Push a Little Daisies, The Mollusk, Ocean Man, I'll Be Your Johnny on the Spot, Zoloft, Buckingham Green, the HIV Song, Spinal Meningitis, Marble Tulip Juicy Tree, Back to Basem, Stroker Ace, You Fucked Up, Dr. Rock, Touch My Tutor, Voodoo Lady, and then for the encore, Someday.
It's awesome. Greg's recollection is that the opening of the show is really kind of was pretty metal, pretty rock. Take Me Away into Captain Fantasy. And I always love the double fantasy, I call it.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm not talking John. It's a way to get a little John Lennon reference in there, I suppose. But a little Take Me Away into Captain Fantasy into Don't Get Too Close to My Fantasy. And then Waving My Dick in the Wind would have been a great one to see Josh Freese like rock out. But I know that was like a rock block
Yeah, man.
to open things up and let everyone know things were going to be all right. And then they apparently had a really dirty Voodoo Lady as well to wrap up the main set. But not too many rarities, just a couple. Back to Basem 149 times, Someday 114. This is only the 13th time Someday's been played. I think wasn't it just brought out that year as well?
Yes.
Just like Zoloft.
Right.
Yeah. So, my impression of this set list is that it's a safe set list, but it's a well-rounded set list. You just threw Josh Freese into the fire. All of these songs were played the day before in at least one of the two shows at John and Peters. So none of these are newbies to him.
Well, but just the fact that they would throw in, a new song at all, for any of the nights is
Yeah.
amazing, but there's two of them. So basically, like if you saw every every show that year, you'd be like, oh, okay, there is still a couple of the new songs, Zoloft and Someday.
Totally. And Zoloft, it's interesting. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but Zoloft is played. I think it's one of the 2 or 3 songs that's played at both John and Peter shows the day before,
Right.
and it's a little bit rocky. At least the first one, it's a little rocky actually, with Freeze and everyone figuring the chemistry out. But then by the second John and Peter show, Zoloft is better, and then I can tell you by the time they get to the House of Blues, it's freaking, it's just beautiful.
Awesome.
Long extended jam, got some great drum, you got the Glen. Give me that C O L O F T. It's a great song. Just because it's played a lot doesn't mean it's not great.
Yeah, man.
But let's roll on to the second night.
Okay.
So this is the second night, October 8th at the Bowery. They open with Ice Castles, then the Golden Eel, the Stallion Part 3, Piss Up a Rope, Spinal Meningitis Got Me Down, Take Me Away, Waving My Dick in the Wind, Bananas and Blow, Voodoo Lady, Albino Sunburn Girl, Ooh La La, Dr. Rock, Fat Lenny, Booze Me Up and Get Me High, Roses Are Free, The Mollusk, Spring Theme, Exactly Where I'm At, You Fucked Up, Stroker Ace, I Can't Put My Finger on It, Zoloft, Buckingham Green, and If You Could Save Yourself, You'd Save Us All, which is a pretty awesome way to end it.
Okay, so a couple of repeats from the night before. It wasn't really like they were doing, each night had to be completely different or anything like that.
I see Voodoo Lady, I see Waving My Dick in the Wind, Take Me Away repeats.
Buckingham Green, Zoloft.
That's already more repeats than they did in the 2 John and Peters. The second show has a lot more uncommons. I mean, well, a couple more anyway. Ice Castles is 147. Albino Sunburn Girl is 86. And this is only the 7th time Uvala was played. Is that another one that was brought out this year?
Yeah, I think that's another.
Yeah.
I would say between Albino Sunburn Girl, Uvala, and also If You Could Save Yourself. Those would have been the new ones for that night.
Yeah, well, Albino Sunburn Girl was 23 times. I feel like that had to have been before 2002 then.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, you're right.
But Uvala total 19 times, so that is a true rarity.
Yeah, that's pretty rare.
And then if you could save yourself, this is the 6th time that was ever played because it just started being played that year, but only 23rd time overall. That's pretty damn rare. And then Spring Theme is another rare one, 73 times. Greg said that was Greg and Fred both. Ooh, it kind of rhymes. Greg and Fred. It's like a gay bar or something. Greg and Fred's. They both mentioned Spring Theme as like the highlight.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
And what else is there? Hartford opened up the night with an all-girl woodwind and string group.
Awesome.
So that was cool. And that was funny because that made me think of, we chatted with Fred, and one of the things he said about Hartford is that like he always brings things to the show that are like different or like unexpected. And I guess got the band's called the Band of Changes. So that's really cool with the all-girl woodwind string group.
Yeah, man. I never knew he did that. I have to look into that and see how long he actually did that with.
Maybe that was just that night. He was just like, I'm going to bring this all-girl group in.
That would be cool. Could have only happened that one night. Yeah, man. Yeah.
But yeah, just looking at it, I feel like night 2 was the better of the 2 nights. But then again, Sound of Urchin was part of the night 1.
Yeah, that's true.
So that gets a little bit, how do you sort that out? I guess just go to both nights.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I know, we know Fred was there for both of these nights, and it's like, you lucky prick.
Yeah. So our buddies Greg and Marcus, I think I just want to share some of what they said. So they gave us like kind of like their final thoughts sort of thing. So you want me to just read these?
Yeah, please do.
So this is Greg. And he says, this is of Josh Freese. So we're kind of like, got a little bit more to say about Josh Freese, I guess. He stepped into Ween with a nanoseconds prep time and literally became CCJ for 2 nights. He wasn't just competent. He managed to duplicate Claude's parts, which is hard enough. But he also managed to duplicate his feel and touch and dynamic range. At the time of the accident, I'd say Claude was one of the most technically skilled and inventive drummers on the planet. We thought he might die after the accident, and by the time of these shows, his complete recovery was by no means guaranteed. There was a distinct possibility that the CCJ era of Ween was at an end. Josh comes into the dates as the sub nobody ever asked for and creates the highest tribute possible. He really made the whole shit work. And here are Marcus's final thoughts. That about sums it up. Freeze was spectacular on short notice, but in those shows, we saw a flash of what might have been if Claude hadn't pulled off a Superman-like recovery to ride that throne like a king once again.
Wow, man.
That could have just be the whole podcast.
Yeah. I mean, well put. Well put. Like we said at the beginning, it's one of those times in the band's history that, you can't deny. It's like, oh, fuck. Like that was a real scary time, but, dare I say, like exciting because it's kind of something new and, like he said, unexpected, just a great quote. Great quote.
Yeah, dude. Very cool. And it was very nice to chat with those guys, and I appreciate them kind of giving us their thoughts on the nights because we weren't there. I mean, like I said, so it's awesome to get some people that were there sharing with us. When we chatted with Fred, we found out that he was at all the shows, and he said that he said, "Oh, the House of Blues was the best one. Oh, I have it somewhere in my stash." So Fred actually shared with us his recording of the House of Blues show. So I took some time to listen to that. So I feel like we should chat a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, man.
I'm not going to bother reading the set list on this one because I don't know, enough set lists. But some of the rarities on this one, some of the notable things here, they do "She's Your Baby," and it's just Aaron and Glenn. It had only been played 10 times up to that point, so that's pretty awesome. 68 total. And then Tender Situation is 109, and that's always great. And this one's no different. And then they wrap up the first set with Ohio, which is 42 times total. The Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young tune, which is fantastic. And that wraps up the main set. But what also makes it notable is all the other tunes that they play up to this point in this show, and then also at the night before, and then also at the Bowery Ballroom and John and Peters, it's all the same group of 50 songs. And they kind of like, they don't play every song at every show, but they rotate through those 50. And these are the only 3. They're all newbies for Josh Freese.
Wow.
It's like this is your last night with us, and we're going to add 3 more songs to your plate. And they're just all wonderful. I mean, they're just amazing.
Wow, man.
And they end the night with Someday, which is 114 times total. So that's pretty cool. Something that also, I guess, is funny that I thought was funny and worth mentioning is before they do Sketches of Winkle, it's a little Barracuda tease. Ding 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 ding.
Cool, man. That's cool.
Barracuda. But then I think it's Mickey says something like, yeah, right, or like, we're not doing it. But it's funny when they're doing it because then you realize like, oh, it is pretty similar to Sketches of Winkle.
That's cool. So just to put just to kind of like, put a cap on things and we'll start like wrapping it up. So Claude, like we had mentioned, Claude does come back at the end of 2002 on December 9th. They play as what's billed as a Gene Ween solo show, and Claude plays drums.
Yeah.
So
at the North 6, and that's in Brooklyn, right?
New York. I mean, that's just crazy to me to think that he's back playing drums that same year. So God bless him, man. Amazing.
4 months earlier, August 7th, right? This is December 9th.
Wow.
He couldn't walk for 2 months.
Jesus.
And by 4 months, he's like playing. Now, they don't play a lot of shows, and I don't know what else he's doing, like musically. They then do a show in February, a couple shows early in April, and then they kind of start getting back into the touring mode very into April and May.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at 2003, I mean, it's one of the biggest years of the band. I mean, Quebec comes out later that year then in 2003, and it's a year chock full of dates. It gets off to a slow start for obvious reasons, and there isn't really a whole lot of shows in the first few months. But it's another just jam-packed year full of shows.
So look at it this way. I just pulled up some data. And due to Claude's accident, 2002 is actually the least number of shows in 1 year since 1991. They pull off about 25 for the entire year of 2002. 2003 is actually their busiest tour year ever.
Yeah, I mean, I would have...
And Quebec comes out.
Without looking at the numbers and everything, I would have guessed maybe, 2000 may have topped it or 99. But yeah, man, I mean, it's insane to think that, Claude had just come back at the beginning of that year. And, we saw him a few times in 2003. And I mean, they were amazing.
Yeah.
So God bless the man. I mean, he's just a machine and just a real inspiration.
Yeah, dude. For him to only have to be out a few months and then Ween's right back on top of it. And yeah, to the whole point, going into their busiest year ever.
Yeah.
With arguably their most media attention.
Crazy, man.
Ever.
Crazy.
And probably, I don't know if Quebec is their highest selling album ever, but it definitely was one that really gave them a lot of exposure.
Yeah, and we'll go on to talk about that in some of our upcoming episodes because we're getting into 2003. But I think a lot of people can agree that it's getting into sort of like a rocky like time period. And Claude's accident sort of signifies like the beginning of that.
It's interesting how it's not like an intentional thing by any means. It's just the way things broke down. And there's this whole like flowering of the community. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, dark clouds are on the horizon. There's so many good things that come out of this tragedy.
Right.
But nevertheless, it's a tough time. Ween doesn't play a lot of shows. They didn't do a lot of shows in 2001.
That's true. That's true.
That was the Glenn hiatus year. But yeah, 2003 ends up being super busy though. And so we are going to be rocking, we're wrapping up 2002 and 2003. Like I said, it's basically May is when they're kind of back on tour. They do, I want to say May 30 or April 30th, and then all the way through May is a tour. And then they pick back up in July. And the July tour at that point is pimping out for Quebec.
Right.
And then that also includes the Vic Theater, the Chicago Live in Chicago is done at fall. I believe they also have an overseas tour in the mix.
It's probably the last one. It was probably the last one that ever
It
happened.
may be the last time they went
Yeah.
overseas. That's Ween anyway.
Well, if I could just recap for a second, and I'll try